Chapter 9, Existence of Jesus. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the apologetics for the existence of Jesus. There are people out there who are under this impression of a conspiracy theory that Jesus never existed and that he is a fabrication of the Catholic Church, or he's a fictional character started by the apostles or people after the apostles, the early church fathers. We as people love conspiracy theories. It sells books. We love to think about shadowy figures who are manipulating the public or doing something devious behind our backs, and it's this massive, grandiose scale that no one can pick up. So it sells books, sells movies. If you have a YouTube channel, put a bunch of conspiracy theories on it, and you're bound to get people who subscribers, because again, we just love conspiracy theories. Dan Brown's book about the Da Vinci Code sold millions. Anyway, when it comes to the existence of Jesus, the conspiracy theory, it just doesn't hold much water. So let's get into it. Those who want to claim that Jesus is a fictional character, that Jesus didn't exist, their foundational argument is that outside of the Bible, there isn't a historical account or physical evidence that says Jesus existed. Again, it has to be outside the Bible because they believe those who are included inside the Bible are in on the conspiracy. What they forget is that the Bible is an account of Jesus written by his closest followers. You know, it's a collection of authors and witnesses. It also has a witness who was after the fact, someone who was opposing the Christians, talking about Paul the Apostle. Paul's letters are very powerful accounts and testimony for the existence of Jesus. But those who want to claim the conspiracy theory have to say, well, Paul was in on it. So they forget again that the Bible is a collection of his closest followers, those who followed along with him. In addition to that, if you brought up Gnostic writings from the 2nd century or 3rd century, they'll discount those because again they'll say those are written by Christians, again, those under the conspiracy theory, even though they're not in the Bible, those are people considered in on it. The first thing that you can say to those people is that there's more historical evidence or written accounts of Jesus than there are 1st century Roman emperors. You can talk about Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Jesus has more written about him than those particular Roman emperors. What you'll find is that the argument against Jesus' existence is a catch-22. Here's why. Let me show you. So you're supposed to provide evidence that Jesus existed outside of the Bible from those who were not following him, who weren't around with him, but who thought he did many things. So you need to find an educated person. Remember, the Jews are educated, the men were educated up until 13. The Gentiles, for the vast majority, they're not educated unless you're among the social elite, and perhaps in the Roman government. So you need to find a written account of Jesus by someone who either A, is going to write about him, but he didn't do anything special, therefore, why is that person spending the time writing him? Or B, the Jewish scribe saw him do several things, but didn't think he was the Messiah and didn't convert. So try and find that. Try and find a written document by someone who wasn't a follower of Jesus, witnessed his many miracles, but didn't convert. You're not going to find that, right? On the Gentile side, you need to find an educated Gentile who can write, who knew about Jesus, kind of followed him maybe. I don't know, or at least accounted Jesus living. But again, either A, didn't think he was anything special, so why is he writing about him? Or B, saw him do special things, but didn't convert from paganism. Saw him do miracles, but still thought paganism was the correct religion for that person. It's a catch-22. You're not going to find that because the Bible has all the written accounts of Jesus. However, we have just that. Let's talk about Josephus. Josephus is a Jewish historian. He is a first-century Jewish historian. He writes the Antiquities of the Jews. He defected from the Jewish side to go to the Roman side, specifically for his life. It was during the Roman conquest of Judea when they sacked Jerusalem and Masada, and they basically were just wiping all the Jews out. Josephus goes to the Roman side and becomes a Jewish historian under Roman rule. So he writes a number of antiquities, a number of books about the Jewish history, and in those he writes some accounts of Jesus. I think it's in book 20, he wrote talking about James being killed in Jerusalem, and James, he says, is the brother of Jesus. So no one questions that account. He also talked about John the Baptist, by the way, which is it's interesting. But there's another account given in book 18 where Josephus says, and then in those days was a man named Jesus who was a miracle worker of sorts. He was Christus, he was the Messiah, and he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And many people debate this or argue this. It's in question, and they say that account of Jesus is a forgery written by the Catholic Church many years later, either the 4th or the 8th century. And the reason being is because if Josephus really thought he was the Messiah, he would have either A, converted, or B, wrote more about him. But he didn't. So their argument is, well, it must have been the Christians who added all these words. It's important to realize, though, that during the time of this forgery, nobody is questioning the existence of Jesus. The forgery, if it is a forgery, no one can prove it. The forgery was not to prove that Jesus existed. The forgery was to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. They already had their Bibles. Everyone is Christian under the Roman Empire. If you're not, good luck to you because you're going to be persecuted and you're going to be a social outcast. Everyone is Christian. So the person who's forging this is not writing it for non-believers or people in a conspiracy theory who were gathered around to question the existence of Jesus. If it is a forgery, which me personally, I don't think it is, specifically because of the vast majority of Christians during that time. Everyone believed that, even the Jews during this time believed that Jesus existed. They just said he wasn't the Messiah. He was born of an illegitimate woman, and he was from this peasant town up in Galilee. And maybe he was crucified, maybe not, but he definitely didn't perform miracles. It was never in question if Jesus was alive, was a real person or not. So whoever forged, if it was a forgery, it was only to give additional evidence to the Bible which we had that was already viewed as a historical document. So that's the debate on Josephus's. Nobody questions whether he mentioned Jesus in the first century. They only question the words that he used to describe him. Next, we have a Gentile, a Roman historian by the name of Tacitus. Tacitus is a Roman historian who all historians view him as a very solid, truthful, trustworthy historian. Tacitus writes good accounts of his emperors in that he writes the good and the bad. He doesn't write biased accounts, so he is well trusted throughout history. He wrote about the Roman fire in 64 AD and Nero persecuting the Christians. And in this excerpt, he writes about the Christians, and it's very evident what he feels about the Christians. He dislikes them and has a very strong animosity towards the Christians, which you can see in his writing. He probably wasn't the only one. He calls them their abominations and their superstitions, and Nero persecutes these Christians, but he mentions their leader, Christus, who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. So here is a Roman Gentile historian giving a first century account of Jesus. Another Roman historian, Suetonius, wrote about the expulsion of Jews from Rome. Remember, this is Emperor Claudius. He expelled all Jews from Rome because of an uprising under the name of Christus. So it's very telling, or it doesn't take a genius to see the similarities in Tacitus and Suetonius' version of Christus and Christus. It's one letter. So he wrote about this expulsion. Interestingly enough, you can see the historical event in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 18, verse 2. Many people have said that this person is Christ, and that the Romans don't know the difference between the Jews and the Christians at this point. They only know that the Christians are evangelizing out there, converting Jews and Gentiles. So they are expelled because of their uprising, or of their ruckus, I should say, that they're creating in Rome. Another document is Didache. Archaeologists have found this document dating back to 50 AD. It is essentially our first catechism. It's labeled The Teaching of the 12. And in it, you see our first teachings on Eucharist, on baptism. You even see our first teaching of abortion, if you can believe it or not. A first century Catholic view of abortion from 50 AD. It's pretty phenomenal. And on that document, you see the account of Jesus. So here is several historical accounts of Jesus written by people who were not Christians. Of course, I guess you could say Didache was probably written by Christian, but I've given the other ones. And they're not the only ones. You know, there was another one, Pliny the Younger talks about the faith of the Christians. I'm not going to get into it. Lastly, I want to just mention a kind of a twist on the conspiracy theory. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about Jesus the Messiah. But in this, I want to talk about the twist of the conspiracy theory. There are those who want to say that Jesus existed. However, the Catholic Church twisted who he was, and that he became a Messiah. So they pick and choose passages from the Bible. The ones that support their theory, those are truth. The ones that disprove their theory must be fiction according to them. So this is a sleight of hand trick. It's using the Bible to disprove Jesus existed. So they'll say things like Jesus was a disciple of John the Baptist, or Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, or Jesus was a zealot, or Jesus was a Sadducee. And again, they'll pick and choose from the gospel stories that will support their theory, and any that disprove their theory, they'll say are fiction. Realize when you see that sleight of hand trick being used, what they don't understand, and the vast majority of people who, with this conspiracy, under the conspiracy theory, don't understand, is the Bible, its origins and its purpose. They're forgetting the fact that the Bible was written way after the fact by Christians for Christians. When we talk about the Gospels, we talk about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all apostolic in origin. Luke was a disciple of Paul's. Mark was a disciple of Peter's. These were practicing evangelizing Christians. The stories were written to support the liturgy that was going on around the Eucharist table. When we talk about the Old Testament, let's read from the Old Testament, let's read from the prophets. Now let's read a passion narrative, or let's read from Paul's letters. They were added to the church. They weren't anonymous people for you to pick and choose what stories you like and what stories you don't. The conspiracy theories that have come out within the last 200 years are simply to sell a book or to sell an idea about Jesus. And this theory that the Catholic Church is this secret organization that has fooled billions of people. It's just not true. The evidence for Jesus is overwhelming, physical or circumstantial. When I talk about circumstantial, I'm talking about a movement within the first century that started in Jerusalem, went all the way up to the Roman Empire, where the movement was blamed for the fire. So the emperor knew that this group was, everybody knew this group, and they weren't certainly an esoteric secret group. They were publicly crucified. The physical evidence, as I've just given, it's overwhelming for the historicity of Jesus. Those who want to claim that Christianity is some sort of conspiracy, fabricated religion by either some poor fishermen in Galilee or by the Roman emperors later on, they're just buying into the idea of the secrecy, and they love the conspiracy, but it holds no evidence or no water.